Right, the Iran war is now directly threatening one of the few countries in the Middle East that has desperately tried to remain neutral throughout this entire catastrophic conflict. And what is happening should alarm anyone who understands regional geopolitics. Oman's Sultan Haitham bin Tariq al-Said has held a phone call with Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian where he conveyed his disapproval and condemnation of ongoing attacks against Omani territory. Let that sink in for a moment. Iran is now attacking Oman, a country that has maintained strict neutrality throughout this war, a nation that has refused to take sides, a sultanate that has historically served as a mediator and bridge between Iran and the West, between Saudi Arabia and Tehran, between competing powers in the region. And how does Iran repay that careful, principled neutrality? By attacking Omani territory. The Omani leader reiterated the Sultanate's neutral stance in the ongoing conflict, while affirming that Oman will take all necessary measures to maintain its security and stability. That is diplomatic language carefully worded, but the message is absolutely clear. We've tried desperately to stay out of this war. We've maintained our neutrality at considerable cost. But if you keep attacking us, we will be forced to respond. This is profoundly significant because Oman borders the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most strategically vital waterways on Earth. If Oman is forced to abandon its neutrality and take military action against Iran, if Omani territory becomes a theater of active combat operations, the entire regional security architecture collapses further and the risk to global energy supplies becomes exponentially greater. Meanwhile, Israel continues hitting Lebanon as its offensive against Hezbollah shows absolutely no signs of stopping or even pausing. Fears are rising dramatically about the security of the Strait of Hormuz as shipping companies and maritime insurers remain utterly convinced the waterway is too dangerous for normal commercial transit. And Gulf states across the region continue to be attacked by Iran despite some, like Oman, maintaining strict neutrality and others, like the UAE and Saudi Arabia, already absorbing devastating strikes while desperately trying to avoid deeper involvement in a war they never wanted. Let's focus on Oman first because this development is deeply, deeply concerning for multiple interconnected reasons. Oman has been scrupulously, almost religiously neutral throughout this conflict. They haven't joined the US-led coalition conducting strikes against Iran. They haven't allowed their territory or airspace to be used for military operations against Iranian targets. They haven't participated in coordinated air defense operations against Iranian missiles and drones. They've maintained open diplomatic channels with Tehran, even as other Gulf states cut ties or reduced contact. They've tried to be a voice of moderation, reason, and potential mediation in a region descending into chaos. And what has been Iran's response to that careful, principled, costly neutrality? Attack them anyway. Strike Omani territory, force Oman into a position where they can no longer remain neutral. Sultan Haytham's phone call to President Pezeshkian conveying disapproval and condemnation is extraordinarily strong language, in diplomatic terms, language that should not be dismissed or underestimated. Sultans and presidents don't usually have urgent phone calls to express disapproval unless something very serious, very dangerous, very unacceptable has happened. This wasn't a routine diplomatic check-in about bilateral relations or trade agreements. This was the Omani leader calling the Iranian president to say directly and unambiguously, you are attacking our territory. This is unacceptable, and there will be consequences if it continues. The Omani statement issued through the country's state news agency said the Sultan reiterated the Sultanate's neutral stance in the ongoing conflict. That is Oman saying with absolute clarity, we are not your enemy. We have stayed out of this war deliberately and at cost. We have not taken sides. We have not joined coalitions against you. We have maintained diplomatic relations. We have tried to be fair and balanced. But then comes the warning, the red line, the statement of intent. Oman will take all necessary measures to maintain its security and stability. Necessary measures. That is not just defensive diplomatic rhetoric or empty posturing. That is a sovereign nation saying clearly, if these attacks continue, if you keep violating our neutrality and striking our territory, we will act to protect ourselves and our commitment to neutrality will no longer constrain our response. We will do what is necessary, and in the context of a country that has tried so hard to stay neutral, that warning carries enormous weight. Why does this matter so profoundly? Because Oman controls strategically vital territory on both sides of the Strait of Hormuz. The Strait, for those unfamiliar with its critical importance, is only about 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. It is a choke point, a bottleneck through which roughly 1/5 of the world's petroleum passes every single day. Tankers carrying oil and liquefied natural gas from Saudi Arabia, UAE, Kuwait, Qatar, Iraq, all must pass through this narrow waterway to reach global markets. If Oman decides it can no longer maintain neutrality, if Omani territory and airspace are used for military operations against Iran, if the strait transitions from being a threatened waterway to an active combat zone with missiles flying and ships being attacked in Omani waters, global oil supplies face catastrophic disruption beyond anything we've seen so far in this conflict. Oil prices surged past $100 per barrel and then fell back below $90 based largely on perceptions of whether the war was escalating or potentially winding down. Imagine what happens to oil prices if the Strait of Hormuz becomes an active war zone. Imagine the impact on global shipping, on insurance rates, on energy costs, on inflation, on every economy on Earth. If 1/5 of the world's oil supply suddenly can't get to market safely, and this attack on Oman speaks to something even more disturbing about Iran's strategic thinking and decision-making. Iran is systematically attacking or threatening every single country around the Persian Gulf. The UAE has been attacked repeatedly with drones and missiles. Saudi Arabia has been hit with ballistic missiles launched at military bases and energy infrastructure targeted. Bahrain has been struck. Kuwait has been involved with the friendly fire incident where Kuwaiti air defenses shot down US jets. Azerbaijan to the north has been attacked. And now Oman, the one country in the entire region that maintained genuine principled, costly neutrality throughout this catastrophe, is being attacked. Iran is turning the entire Gulf region into enemies. Every nation that tried desperately to stay out of this war is being forced to choose sides. And here is the fundamental problem with that approach. When you force neutral countries to choose, when you attack them despite their neutrality, they typically don't choose the side that has been attacking them, they choose the other side. Iran is creating enemies where none existed. Iran is eliminating the diplomatic space, the neutral ground, the potential mediators who might have helped find an off-ramp from this disaster. Oman could have been a channel for de-escalation. Oman could have facilitated back-channel negotiations. Oman could have served as a neutral venue for talks or a trusted intermediary between Iran and the West. But if Iran keeps attacking Omani territory, if Iran forces Oman to abandon neutrality and take sides, that option disappears. That pathway closes, and the war becomes even harder to end because there are no neutral parties left to facilitate dialogue. Meanwhile, the situation in Lebanon continues to deteriorate with no end in sight. Israel continues hitting Lebanese territory as its offensive against Hezbollah grinds on relentlessly. The death toll keeps mounting, infrastructure keeps being destroyed, entire neighborhoods in southern Beirut remain evacuate. And Israel shows absolutely no indication of stopping this campaign despite the massive humanitarian cost, despite the regional instability it is creating, despite the risk of dragging Lebanon as a whole into wider conflict. Fears about the Strait of Hormuz continue to rise among shipping companies, insurers and traders, even though oil prices have fallen back below $90 per barrel. That doesn't mean the waterway is safe. It means markets are betting, hoping, gambling that perhaps the worst is over. But shipping companies and their insurers are not taking that bet. They're keeping vessels away from the Gulf. They're refusing to transit the strait. They're demanding astronomical premiums for coverage if captains are willing to make the journey at all. The physical reality on the water doesn't match the optimism in financial markets. And Gulf states across the region, even those that have tried to maintain neutrality or limited involvement, continue to absorb Iranian attacks. This isn't theoretical, this isn't posturing. This is actual missiles being fired, actual drones being launched, actual territory being struck. Countries that wanted no part of this war are being attacked anyway. Countries that tried to stay neutral are being forced to defend themselves. Countries that maintain diplomatic relations with Tehran are now receiving condemnation calls from their leaders to Iran's president. Here is the bottom line, and it is deeply troubling. Oman's Sultan has conveyed official disapproval and condemnation to Iran's president over ongoing attacks on Omani territory. This is Iran attacking one of the only genuinely neutral countries left in the entire region. The Oman leader reaffirmed the Sultanate's commitment to neutrality, but issued a clear warning that Oman is necessary measures to maintain its security and stability. That is a country being systematically forced to abandon neutrality, not by choice, but by Iranian aggression. Israel continues its relentless offensive in Lebanon with no pause, no ceasefire, no humanitarian respite. Fears about the Strait of Hormuz and global energy security continue to mount despite temporary market optimism. Gulf states across the region, whether they chose involvement or tried to stay neutral, continue to face Iranian attacks. Iran is systematically eliminating any possibility of neutral ground in this conflict. Iran is forcing every nation in the Gulf to become either an active combatant or a helpless victim. The regional war expands geographically and in terms of participants. The neutral space that might have allowed for mediation and de-escalation collapses. And the world inches closer every day to a full-scale crisis in the Strait of Hormuz that could devastate global energy supplies, spike inflation worldwide, and create economic chaos affecting every person on this planet. This has been The Royal Truth. I'll see you next time.